It all started with the nightmares. Dex figured they'd been in the kindergarten for about 2 weeks, and things had been going well. Red band class got easier as Dex ate regularly and worked out daily. His body was becoming toned, strong, and he was catching up with Dick at an alarming rate. Despite being older than Dex, it seemed to gall Dick that Dex was bigger than him. Dex couldn't help it. He'd always been kind of tall, and the muscle made it even more obvious. He'd heard Dick floating the idea that Dex and Ryan might be more than just friends, but he seemed pretty careful to say it out of earshot of Dex or Cutter. Dex had known enough people who were scared of folks to know that, despite being 2 years older than him, Dick was a little hesitant about finding out if Dex could fight or not. Masha, too, seemed to be thriving, and that made Dex feel a lot better about this place. Britt, Jenny, and Daniel now ate breakfast with them, all of them excitedly talking about what they were doing in class that day. Dex laughed at their lessons a few times, liking how it sounded more like play than work. Masha told him that sometimes they did an exercise similar to the telephone, where they would pass a message along and change it a little. Sometimes it got kind of funny, and Masha was barely able to tell them about it without giggling. Dex smiled at her stories, but it was hard not to notice the angry shadow eating not too far away. It appeared that Chandra, the platinum-haired bully of a few weeks ago, had not been having a fun time. For someone who had been such a catty asshole, she had really lost the most in this exchange. Her friends were now eating meals with her enemy, and the teachers had her playing second fiddle to a girl half her age. It was hard not to recognize that she was plotting something. The first time Masha woke up screaming, Dex thought it was just bad dreams. She was sleeping in her own bed now, no longer afraid of being alone, and Dex had been glad that she was settling in. She still spent her evenings with her two best friends, Dunston and Dex, but she always went back to her bed when it was time to sleep. So when he heard her scream, he was up like a shot, weaving between the beds to get to her. He was afraid that Chandra had made her move, that Masha was being taken away by one of the minders for something strange and a little scary. But when he found her thrashing in her bed, he was almost relieved. She was clutching the covers, tossing and groaning, and he patted her head and tried to soothe her as those sleeping around her sighed and rolled over. Nightmares were something he could understand. Dex didn't wake up screaming, but it was only because he was used to being quiet. Every night he watched Wizard die, and every night he just stood there as it happened. He watched the red spread across his friend, watched it soak into his clothes, watched the life leave his eyes, and then Dex would wake up, only to fall into the same dream again. Some days he worked himself until he was exhausted, and those nights he didn't have any dreams. Those were the good nights, but they didn't happen often enough. He lay there with her that night, giving her what comfort he could, but it wasn't enough. She shuddered awake several times, but that was the only time she screamed on the first night. Dex was tired the next morning, but not as tired as he would come to be the next day. When he asked her about the nightmares, Masha said she couldn't remember them at all. She remembered being tired, she remembered being scared, but she didn't remember why. Just dreams, I guess. I've never really been prone to nightmares, but maybe it's all the brain stuff we've been doing lately. She started chatting with her friends when they came to join them, but Dex wasn't sure he agreed. He tried to talk about it with Dunston, but he was no help. He looked like he had slept worse than Masha, and when Dex mentioned it, he made a lame attempt at a quip. Maybe she's been poking around in my head. There are definitely some things in there that could cause a few nightmares. When the bell rang a few minutes later, they all shuffled off to class, each looking less sure than the other that they wanted to go. Grab something that seems to speak to you, something that interests you. I want to see if we can get some solid data on your abilities today. Dr. Hammershoal had lined up some objects, and as Dunston looked at them, he couldn't find a single one that he actually wanted to touch. There was a single Nike trainer on one end, a dirty brown rabbit toy that looked like it had been excavated from a ditch, a transformer that was currently in the shape of a pickup truck, and a frisbee that looked like someone had run over half of it. It wasn't just how they looked either. Dunston could almost feel something coming off them, a kind of energy he didn't like, and it made him want to touch them even less. "Doc, I don't really want to touch any of these." "Come now, my boy, just a quick touch so we can see what we're working with. You want to know the extent of your powers, don't you?" He did, but these tests had been getting weirder as the days passed. It had been bad enough when he was watching people's lives as their parents fought or people were mugged, but for the last 2 days it had been different somehow. Tuesday, he'd held a wallet that had belonged to a man that had been kidnapped. Dunston had watched them take the wallet and then saw the man as he went into the trunk of their car. The little doctor had asked him questions after that, and Dunston had been able to remember the license plate of the car and what color it had been. He told them, and then the next day, there had been a hat on the table. It wasn't a particularly special hat, it was just a battered old White Sox hat, but when Dunston had touched it, he'd seen a kid about his age walking by the side of the road. The kid had been hitchhiking, Dunston was almost certain, and when a station wagon with Detroit plates had picked him up, the hat had fallen into the floorboard when he passed out against the window. The kid had put it in his lap, his hands kneading it like a worry stone, and when the kid had been carried from the car into somewhere, the hat had been left behind. Dunston thought it might have been a hotel or a resort or something, but he couldn't be sure. Now, there were more things, and Dunston didn't want to touch them. The last two had been different somehow. Dunston had seen bad stuff before when he touched things, but this was different. He got the idea that Hammershoal knew he would see those things, but now the game had higher stakes. Hammershoal looked interested when he told him about the kid in the station wagon and the old guy in the trunk of the car. He'd scribbled down information and told Dunston he'd done very well, but Dunston didn't think he'd been trying to test him. Dunston suspected that he was using him to gain information. But for what? "I don't know," he said. "Sometimes I see awful things when I touch the stuff you bring in. I don't know if I..." When the rabbit came sailing towards him, Dunston stuck his hands out to catch it without much thought. He didn't want it to fall on the ground, no more than he wanted anything here to fall off the table, but he realized the trap the second he'd caught it. The second his fingers sank into the plush fur of the filthy toy, he knew he had made a grave error. Dunston got a flash, and then more than he bargained for. He was walking up the street with a bag of garbage in one hand and the stuffed bunny in the other. No, that wasn't quite right, and Dunston realized about a second before the kid got snatched that he was seeing things from the swinging perspective of the bunny and not the kid holding it. The garbage fell to the sidewalk, and the kid had a death grip on the rabbit as someone grabbed him up and threw him in the back of a panel van. It was the kind his friends at the group home had always called a candy wagon, with blacked-out windows and heavy sliding doors, and this one seemed to live up to the expectation. No candy, but there was a treat in the back for somebody. The kid cried a lot and clutched at the rabbit as the van rolled off. Dunston could feel the tears soaking into his fur and wanted to do something. Is this what it was like being a toy? Standing by impotently as some kid who loved you got hurt or killed? If this is what it was like, Dunston thought the characters in the Toy Story movie would need some pretty big therapy by the end of the series. They drove and drove, the kids' tears coming endlessly, but once they stopped, things got a whole lot worse. The guy opened the doors of the van, letting in light as the kid huddled against the back wall. The light was snuffed out pretty quick, and the guy grabbed the rabbit and tossed Dunston into the corner as he went to work. Dunston had a front row seat, the black button eyes seeing every cut, and every scream. When the little hand reached out to grab him, Dunston felt the kid pull the rabbit close as he wheezed out his final breath. Even in his last moments, he wanted the comfort that rabbit could give him, and when the man took him from the back of the van, he had a death grip on the grubby little toy. They went through the woods, the leaves crunching and the birds singing their hesitant song. Dunston had seen a sign, Ridgeway Overlook, and when they reached the kid's final resting place, the killer had dropped him like he was nothing but a sack of garbage. The boy was dead, the rabbit slipping from his hand, and Dunston watched as he dug the hole. He begged, he pleaded to be released from this, but it wasn't until the boy was under the earth that the hand gripped him and took him back to the van. He dropped him not far from the sign, as casually as he had the boy, and that was when Dunston came out of it. Dunston dropped the rabbit, letting it fall to the ground, and looked around in confusion. He realized that all that had happened in a matter of seconds, the memories having been imparted just as quickly as he'd reached for the rabbit. He looked at Dr. Hammarskjöld like the man had raped him, and to his credit, Dr. Hammarskjöld had the good grace to look sorry. What the hell was that? Dunston was shocked to hear how unsteady his voice was. Did you see something? The little man asked. If you saw something, I need to know about it. How could you do that? Dunston asked, wanting to curl into a ball and resisting the urge with great difficulty. How the hell could you do that? You had no right. You had no... What we do here, Dunston, is bigger than you and I. We are providing a public service, as well as feeling out your blossoming abilities. Now, tell me what you saw. Dunston told him, trying to keep his voice from shaking. But when Hammarskjöld told him that he had done well, and he could leave early, Dunston made his way quickly to the bathroom and threw up. He couldn't believe what he had seen, and it was something that would stick with him for a long, long time. Dex was getting worried about his friends. Masha had been sleeping poorly for the last couple of days. Dunston had been quiet ever since lessons on Tuesday. Dex had recognized Masha's problem right away, but had been slower to pick up on Dunston's. Dex was starting to realize just how much of his attention he was giving to the program, and it made him feel kind of crappy. They were sitting in the game room one afternoon, Masha taking a nap on one of the couches as the boys watched cartoons on the big TV. Dex really liked this Adventure Time show, and he was a little jealous of the carefree Finn and his adventures in the land of UwU. Dunston was watching too, but he would periodically wipe at his eyes as he watched, crying sometimes, for no discernible reason. "You okay, man?" Dex finally asked him. "Yeah," Dunston said, his voice watery as runners of snot slid from his nostrils. I don't know what it is, but it's all right. It'll pass. It always does." Dex watched him close his eyes, tears dripping through them, and gain control of himself before sighing deeply and fixing his usual smile back on. "Is it the training?" Dex asked. "Are they making you do stuff that hurts you?" Dunston opened his mouth to respond, but didn't seem to have an answer right away. I don't really know how to explain it. I told you, I can see things, right? When I touch stuff, I mean." Dex nodded, Masha rolling a little bit as she tried to get comfortable. "Well, they've been giving me some stuff lately. Stuff I don't really want to hold once I have it." "What kind of stuff?" Dex asked. Not sure he wanted to know either, but trying to help Dunston as best he could. "Kids stuff, toys and stuffed animals and things. At first it was just trucks and action figures and things I could make sense of, but lately it's changed. Today they handed me a stuffed rabbit, and I saw a kid get dragged into a panel van, and they killed him. Like..." Dunston started crying again, and Dex wished he hadn't asked. "Dude, they really worked this kid over. Then they took him into the woods, and he died as this sick prick dug a hole and put him in it. I watched this kid watching this guy dig his grave. I don't know how to process that, Dex. I don't know what to do with this stuff. Stuff like this scares me. And when I get done, Hammarskjöld wants me to fill out a damn survey. A survey! He yelled, and some of the kids got quiet as they looked at him. Masha woke up, looking scared, as she looked over at Dunston. Dunston, what's wrong? Are you okay? Dunston had gotten off the couch, looking like he wasn't sure whether to run or sit back down. I don't know, he finally told the little girl, and Dex thought for sure that he was going to take a seat again when something over his shoulder caught his attention. His lower jaw was quivering as he watched, and Dex turned to see what had caught him, and saw the news station talking about the remains of a child they had discovered. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but the news prompt said, 10-year-old case closed. Remains of Donovan Kyles found in New Hampshire woods at 3 o'clock this afternoon. The kid pictured couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, but it was the toy he was holding in the featured picture that caught Dex's attention. The stuffed rabbit was pretty jarring after what Dunston had said, and when he looked back, the boy was bolting from the room. Dunston came into Dr. Hammarskjöld's office like a bull in a china shop. The little doctor was seated at his computer, making notes on the day's experiments, and he jumped about a foot when the kid came barreling in. Dunston looked mad enough to chew nails and spit staples, but Dr. Hammarskjöld resisted the urge to just push the button for the security people. He had expected something like this might happen, and it was best to get it out of the way. What the hell? How did they know? How did they know? Dunston asked. I'm guessing you're talking about Donovan Kyle, Dr. Hammarskjöld said. Yeah, I filled out a survey after you practically shoved that filthy rabbit in my hand, and about a day later they just happened to find the kid? That seems pretty damn convenient to me. Dr. Hammarskjöld locked his computer and turned to give the boy his full attention. It's not convenient at all, Dunston. Many of the children in this program are used for such matters. Many of your friends in the group are given situations that they may or may not be able to tell the outcome of. Mark is being used to find suspects for various police forces through photographs, fingerprints, and footcasts. Anja is using photos to tell us who might be a potential security threat, though she isn't quite as helpful as you or Mark at the moment. So you see, this isn't just you. We all have our part to play in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, well, my grand scheme requires me to watch kids get butchered, and I don't much care for it, Dunston said. Dr. Hammarskjöld nodded. I can see where that might be problematic. Would you like me to help you? Dunston gave him an odd look and took a step back. Help me? How would you do that, exactly? Dr. Hammarskjöld pushed out his chair and offered it to Dunston. I have a small talent with mental suggestion. I've helped many people your age forget things, lessen the blow of things, become less anxious about things. And I can help you, if you like. Dunston hesitated, seeming divided over the idea of the little man helping him forget, but ultimately he took a seat. In the end, Dr. Hammarskjöld reflected, they all decided to forget. Now then, count down from 10 for me. Once you reach 10, we may begin. Dunston was much happier at dinner than he had been in days. He had most of the table in stitches with his quips, but Dex thought his smile looked a little phony. From across the cafeteria, Gerald thought the same, and there was something new as well, a new string linking them now, a purple one. This was the first time he had seen a purple string, and Gerald didn't like it in the least bit. Dunston would need watching now, and Gerald hoped that he would be up to the task when the time came. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.